S-619, the COVID-19 Origin Act of 2023. The bill would require the Director of National Intelligence to declassify and make public within 90 days information on the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic. In recent weeks, both the Department of Energy and the FBI have publicly stated that they believe the most likely scenario for the origins of COVID-19 is a laboratory leak. As members know, the Wuhan Institute of Virology was involved in so-called gain-of-function research on coronaviruses in Wuhan, China, which is where the COVID-19 was first reported. It's neither a stretch of logic nor conspiracy theory to state that it's likely that the Department of Energy and the FBI's assessment is correct, and that a laboratory leak constitutes the most likely scenario behind the emergence of COVID-19. S-619 will ensure that as much information as possible is declassified and made public to help the United States better prepare for future pandemics. The second bill we will consider is House Joint Resolution 27, a resolution of disapproval under the Congressional Review Act, providing for the disapproval of the recent Waters of the United States rule. In January, the Army Corps of Engineers and Environmental Protection Agency issued a new rule that defined the term waters of the United States as it is found in the Clean Water Act. Unfortunately, this definition is far too broad and is overly inclusive. If it is allowed to remain in effect, it will amount to the federal government asserting the right to regulate geographic features like wetlands, ditches, and ephemeral or intermittent streams. This will create significant regulatory burdens for small businesses, manufacturers, farmers and ranchers, and local communities across the country. It will have a particularly damaging effect in rural districts like the one I represent, which is why I'm proud to have joined every member of the Oklahoma delegation in co-sponsoring this resolution. In passing H.J. Res. 27, we will be providing regulatory certainty for Americans, reducing compliance costs, and ensuring that our federal water regulations comply with congressional intent. Our final item is H.R. 140, the Protecting Speech from Government Interference Act. In recent years, we've seen repeated instances of high-powered government officials in the executive branch using their official authority or influence to pressure content platforms like Twitter to suppress an otherwise lawful speech. H.R. 140 would put an end to this practice and will ensure that no government official engages in tacit or explicit censorship or other suppression of lawful speech. The free speech is guaranteed under the First Amendment to the Constitution. In taking up H.R. 140, we're ensuring that the federal government will always adhere to that right and to ensure that freedom of speech remains a key principle governing our democracy. I now yield to my good friend, our ranking member, Mr. McGovern, for any remarks he wishes to make.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as you mentioned, today we'll consider three measures. First is S-619, the COVID-19 Origin Act. Look, the American people and, in fact, the international community deserve to know how COVID originated. And shortly after President Biden took office, he told the U.S. intelligence community to answer that question. He said that, quote, critical information about the origins of this pandemic exists in the People's Republic of China. Yet from the beginning, government officials in China have worked to prevent international investigators and members of the global public health community from assessing it, end quote. The intelligence community continues to gather data in search of answers. They have now released a public report. That report is inconclusive. Members of Congress can view the classified version of the report, but the bottom line is that we don't know for sure, and we need to keep investigating. I'd also like to point out that the House Intelligence Committee is having a markup on a House version of this bill later today. It would be great if we could have markups on bills before they come to this committee, which is supposed to be the last stop before the floor. Perhaps there will be important discussions about the bill that would have made it better or identified flaws. We won't know because the markup is happening later this afternoon. In any event, we have H. Res. 27, a Congressional Review Act that would roll back efforts to protect rivers, streams, and wetlands across America. 3 weeks ago, a train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, dumped dangerous chemicals into local water. The Trump administration got rid of rules about better brakes on trains carrying flammable materials, ended regular rail safety audits of railroads, and put chemical industry lobbyists in charge of the EPA office overseeing chemical safety. And now, Republican leadership is advancing a bill so the very polluters they deregulated can get out of paying to clean up the toxic messes they've made. I think we should rename this the Polluter Protection Act. It recklessly ties the hands of federal agencies that want to protect our nation's water at a time when we should be doing the opposite. Finally, we have H.R. 140, the Protecting Speech from Government Interference Act. We could focus on literally anything. We could be focusing on inflation, food costs, climate change, health care access, issues that affect the daily lives of Americans. But here we are today focused on Twitter. My Republican colleagues claim that this bill is about free speech. Give me a break. Let's back up a second and just kind of review the Republican record on free speech. 25 states, all with Republican lawmakers in charge, have passed 64 laws prohibiting students from learning about certain things in school. Republican-led states have banned over 1,000 books in schools. A Republican lawmaker in the Tennessee House wants to burn the books instead of just banning them. And so when it comes to censorship, the Republican Party may want to start looking in the mirror. In fact, I've submitted an amendment to ensure that nothing in this act will prohibit a federal employee from advocating against the banning of books, specifically books on topics such as communities of color, the history of slavery and racism in the United States, and books with LGBTQI characters. This bill is based on a totally false premise that the government pressured Twitter to take down news stories, even though the GOP's own witnesses at their oversight hearing said that's not what happened. But who cares about the facts? And now, in pursuit of their disproven claims, the majority seeks to redefine the First Amendment in pursuit of their own political agenda. Look, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again, 73% of Americans, nearly 3 of 4 people, say that the Republican majority in the House is not focusing on the right issues. Instead of working on things that matter to most people, like lowering costs, helping families, and supporting workers, we are wasting time on nonsense like this. And you know who loses out the most on all of these wasted opportunities? The American people. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record. I'd like to welcome our first panel, Chairman Turner and Ranking Member Himes, to the witness table. Chairman Turner, I welcome your testimony.
Chairman Cole, Ranking Member Govern, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for having us here today and for inviting us to testify on Senate Bill 619. I'm proud to be here with my ranking member, Jim Himes. We are your new Intelligence Committee. We won't always agree on everything, but we are committed to working together in a bipartisan and professional manner. Senate 619 is a bill that would require the Director of National Intelligence to declassify information relating to the origins of COVID-19. This is a bill that passed the Senate on unanimous consent. Mr. Chairman, COVID-19 pandemic wreaked havoc across the country, with almost every household feeling its effects. The United States death toll from the virus has surpassed 1 million people. Although concrete data is hard to lock down, millions of Americans are suffering from the long-term effects directly attributed to the virus. COVID-19 has also negatively affected our communities, especially our kids. It is becoming increasingly clear that school-age children face major educational hurdles because of distance learning and long-term school closures. The American public deserves answers to every aspect of the COVID-19 pandemic, including how this virus was created, and specifically whether it was a natural occurrence or was the result of a lab-related event. Mr. Chairman, the House Intelligence Committee, which oversees our intelligence community, is aware of classified information that would help inform the public as to why the FBI director has indicated that a COVID-19 lab leak is not just a possibility, but approaches the idea that it is likely. The intelligence community does have more information about COVID-19 than the public has seen. Much of the information the intelligence community has can be declassified and disseminated to the public. In fact, the bill we are discussing today would give the American public just a glimpse, albeit a very important aspect of the classified information that the intelligence community holds. Senate 619, if passed by the House and signed into law, would give the American public a unique insight as to what was happening at biosafety level laboratory in Wuhan, China in late 2019 and early 2020. The laboratory and who was working there might be the key to unraveling the truth. For those concerned about declassifying COVID-19 origins information, I can assure you that the intelligence community could release its information while protecting their sources and methods of how it was collected. In fact, Senate 619 explicitly authorizes the Director of National Intelligence to make such redactions necessary to protect sources and methods. COVID-19 ranks as this century's most important event. No community was spared, and every corner of the world felt its effects. Everyone deserves to know what our intelligence community knows, and Senate 619 is a step in the right direction. We do expect, as Ranking Member McGovern has noted, that we will be passing a House version of this bill out on a bipartisan basis today. With that, I am happy to answer any questions that you have and to yield to my Ranking Member.
Chairman Cole, Ranking Member McGovern, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to share my views on S619. I plan to support this legislation both in committee, where we will mark up a companion bill this evening, and in the full House later this week. Determining the precise origins of a pandemic disease is challenging under the best of circumstances, but because COVID originated in China, the efforts to definitively determine its source have been even more difficult. At every juncture, the PRC government has obfuscated and obstructed legitimate inquiries, a deeply irresponsible approach to global public health. In 2021, President Biden ordered a 90-day sprint by the intelligence community to analyze the origins of the virus. Because of both technical analysis and access to clandestine intelligence, the IC is uniquely positioned to answer those questions if they can be answered. In August of 2021, the IC completed its initial work, and in October, a declassified version of the findings were made public. In short, despite major efforts, most IC agencies judged that there was simply not enough information to make a judgment about the likelihood of how and where the virus originated. Some agencies did reach a judgment about which path was more likely, but they could not do so with high confidence, and that remains true today. All members can review the classified assessment through the House Security Office, which explains in much greater detail the basis for the IC's analysis. Around 18 months after the completion of the first IC assignment, not much has changed. Chairman Turner and I can both attest that the IC remains focused on the question. The COVID-19 Origins Act is not the bill I would have necessarily drafted on the topic, but I support it because I share the belief that the intelligence community should continue to get to the bottom of COVID's origin. And importantly, I believe that they should make as much public as they can so the American people can consider the best available information we have, as opposed to marinating in conjecture and speculation and conspiracy theories. Taking a step back, whether COVID-19 originated from a lab leak or natural transmission, the next pandemic disease could originate from either source. In 2022, the House Intelligence Committee released a declassified report looking at how the IC responded to COVID-19 and making recommendations for how we can be better prepared for the next pandemic disease, wherever it may come from. Even as the IC looks backwards to 2019 and the first days of the pandemic, we need to keep looking forward to how we can be ready for the next one. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and happy with the Chairman to take any of your questions.
And I thank you both for being here today. I'll start with myself in Mr. Cole's absence. And I did see the Sunday morning news show where you were interviewed on this topic. You both did very well. But I got the impression, and correct me if I'm wrong, that at the President's direction, there was an evaluation done in the intelligence community. But that part that was made public was very different from that part which is still classified. Did I understand that correctly?
They don't contradict each other, but it's really the sense that you get from reading them that I think doesn't follow. When I read the classified report and then I read the unclassified report, there were conclusions that were in the classified report that were not accurately, in my opinion, reflected in the unclassified version. As the minority last year, we issued a report, and on the bottom page 6, top page 7, we go into the difference. And largely it goes to the fact that in the unclassified version, they began to eliminate whether they had low confidence, medium confidence, or high confidence, which was very evident and clear in the first report. And that contrast, I think, misleads someone.
So, Mr. Himes, let me. I'll take you at your word that any member will have the ability to review the classified? Because I have not. I have asked and have not been allowed to do that, but is that now a possibility?
That's correct. If a request is made by any member of Congress to review classified information, the typical procedure is for the Intelligence Committee to vote on that request. To my memory, it is almost always agreed to, and that member can then come down and review whatever he or she seeks.
Unfortunately, that has not been my experience. Now, I will just say, Department of Energy,
So his answer is, and my answer is yes.
very well. You can expect the request at the conclusion, at the gavel of this hearing. But the defense, I'm sorry, the Energy Department's intelligence figure who quoted that there was a lab leak responsible for this. And then as a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, I've not been able to get access to that report that the Department of Energy has produced. And the reason that becomes important is shortly after that, the head of the FBI was interviewed on a television program where he acknowledged that a lab leak was the most likely source. So you can understand people's frustration with this, and that's why I think it's so important to get as much information out to the public as we possibly can. When the coronavirus first hit 3 years ago, comments were made about how China was extremely forthcoming with information. They came forward, gave the genetic sequence, and it was a vastly different China than the one that had held information away from the public after the first SARS outbreak in 2003. Were those statements incorrect? Was China forthcoming?
So first off, no, they were not. But you are referring, I think, to the initial period where there may have been individuals who were not yet working in coordination with the Chinese government, where there was information that was shared. But no, they have not been forthcoming. They've actually been thwarting the efforts for not only the United States but others to find the information of what was happening in China.
And this is so important. I mean, when then China moves into its zero COVID episode that it just emerged from, I mean, you got to ask yourself, what do they know now that they're not sharing with us? Because 3 years ago, they knew some stuff and weren't sharing with us, and it all turned out to be really, really bad. So, again, I just can't stress how important it is to get the information out there to the public, let people make their own assessments on this. In fact, in May of 2021, I was promised by the then chairman of the Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee in Energy and Commerce that the Energy and Commerce Committee would have a hearing into the origins of COVID and try to get from the Chinese what they knew. But then that never happened. It just sort of went into the round file. And I do have the transcript of that hearing, and I will be submitting that for the record without objection, so ordered. Feels very powerful to be able to say that, Mr. Ranking Member. But I really want to thank both of you for being here. Just ask you an open-ended question. Is there any reason why we wouldn't want to make this information public now?
I don't think so. Neither one of us would sit in front of you and suggest this, and certainly the Senate, who has individuals who have equal access to classified information, would not have passed by unanimous consent if this information would be damaging to us. And in addition, the bill that is before you has the provision that if the Director of ODNI determines that any of the information is of concern, that they have the ability to redact it.
Yeah, I agree with the chairman, Mr. Burgess, and I actually think there is protection against the revelation of sources and methods. I also think this will be actually really good education for my colleagues, because when they have an opportunity to look at this information, they're going to see what the chairman and I have now seen, which is there's just not much conviction at all on the part of any of the 17 elements of the intelligence community, not because these aren't very competent agencies, but because the information from China simply has not been forthcoming. So it's not going to be enormously revelatory for our colleagues to see this information, but it's really important that they understand what we do know.
Well, and again, just underscoring, it is so important that we do know. And as I think, Mr. Turner, you referenced, there could be a next time, and we do need to be prepared for whatever might be what might be ahead. I'll yield to the ranking member of the Rules Committee, Mr. McGovern.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, I think we all, there's no reason not to support this bill. We all want to get to the bottom of this. We all want to know the truth. And I think it's important that, as Dr. Burgess pointed out, to say that China has not been forthcoming in the beginning. We had the previous occupant of the White House assured us early on that China was cooperating. It was forthcoming. It turned out not to be true. But look, this is just a technical question. I mean, I'm a big proponent of regular order, hearing, markup, rule, then floor. So I commend you for at least holding a markup later today. But I would maybe call this irregular order because you are supposed to mark it up before you come here. Why is this being done backwards? I mean, are we going to have two votes? Yeah.
One of the reasons why we're doing it, because it's, it could be perfunctory as to why is our committee marking up a bill that came out of the Senate unanimous consent and is headed here, is because we wanted to make the statement as the committee that with the exact same text and obviously with access to the information that this bill is about, that we support the bill. It was really our only way to do that, to give the House confidence that those who have access to the information see that the Senate bill was one that can be supported.
Yeah, I guess I'm just a little, I don't know why a unanimous vote or near unanimous vote on the House floor wouldn't do the same thing. So I assume that you're not going to change much of the bill.
No, the one that's coming to the floor is the Senate version. Our House version, which will pass our committee
Which
today,
we'll mark up later, yeah.
bipartisan, is the exact same text, and it will,
yeah.
and most likely, my understanding, will be passing on a bipartisan basis.
So we're not going to be
It will
voting twice on the same bill?
You will not.
Okay, all right. Well, in any event, I mean, I think, look, I think everybody wants to get to the truth and to find out what really happened here. And I think as much as it can be declassified in a responsible way so the American people can see what the reality is and the truth is, I think is a useful pursuit. So in any event, I will support this when it comes to the floor, and thank you. I yield back.
Chair, thanks. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Chairman Turner, would you like to talk about just how damaging it was that the lab leak theory was pushed, said that was a conspiracy theory and that banned early on, and that the mainstream media and the Democratic Party ran with this conspiracy theory that there was a leak at the wet market? Could you just talk about the damage to national security that created?
It's good when we have a full debate, right? And all opposing information is reviewed. Even if it's scientific information, it should be subject to the same process of being challenged and then conclusion. But the issue that we have in most of these type of topics where it involves another nation is they're listening too. And so while we're trying to come to conclusion as to what is the source, and they're getting sort of a free ride, if you will, from a suppression of debate, it's not helpful.
What about the fact that you had the World Health Organization basically parroting talking points from the Chinese Communist Party, saying that COVID originated in a wet market? I mean, they basically were ignoring the evidence that was presented to them, by the way, by the Taiwanese who the Chinese will not allow in the World Health Organization. But would you like to talk about the suppression of that information and maybe also the sidelining of the Taiwanese by the World Health Organization?
Yeah, we're certainly committed to world organizations by which we can all come together and take up topics that are worldwide. Certainly the United Nations, the World Health Organization. In all of those, though, the fact that these other countries who might be the source of an issue, like Russia and Ukraine, or China and the COVID virus, it does affect the debate that they're present. That's why it's so important that the United States, which is an open society, have that debate, exchange that information, and look to science.
Would you be willing to talk about how the Chinese Communist Party actually destroyed evidence and would not allow Americans or other Westerners to have access to the BSL-4 lab right after COVID, and maybe talk about what that would indicate to you?
At this point, the one thing I can talk about is certainly that they're not forthcoming, and that they thwarted our opportunities to have direct access, and that certainly impeded our ability to bring in scientists, virologists, those individuals who would have an understanding of the information they're looking at. But I do think that we do have other sources and methods that are continuing to be pursued that can help us inform this process and come to a conclusion.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. To me, it just seems like we should have been doing this at the beginning of the pandemic. And if you looked at it, so I was shadow banned by Facebook and Twitter. I'm not sure if you know that. I came out actually 2 days ahead of Senator Cotton saying that this virus originated in a lab. And I did it because I was on the China task force. We received a briefing. And if you just look at the evidence, it was overwhelming that this originated in a lab. I mean, if you were to believe the wet market theory, which I think is a conspiracy theory, you would have to believe that a bat 1,000 miles away from Wuhan miraculously traveled 1,000 miles. By the way, when it was traveling, did not infect any other animals along the way, ended up in Wuhan. Then the virus jumped to 20 times more lethal than the state of nature with a perfect S protein. I know you know what I'm talking about, the S protein. And there was a BSL-4 lab in Wuhan that was being run by the PLA and the general in charge of their bioweapons program with an expert that specialized in zoonotic diseases, specifically bat-borne respiratory viruses. I mean, I could prosecute that case all day, win every day of the week, twice on Sunday. Would you just like to talk about the overwhelming evidence that this did originate in a lab and not the theory that it was in the wet market? I know we've talked about some of it, but like specifically the overwhelming evidence that this came from a lab.
Right, so at this point, I think we have to wait for the declassification of some of the information that this bill would relates to have a full conversation about that.
I can respect that, especially given the chairmanship that you have. On a lighter note, I want to just welcome my political science professor, Dr. Spiel. My colleagues across the aisle can blame me on Dr. Spiel because that's the guy that taught me politics. In the back, I got nothing but respect for him, and he's with students from my alma mater, so they're here to. I told them they got to come into the Rules Committee because it's the committee that it's the real committee in Congress. Let's just put it that way. So I just wanted to welcome Dr. Spiel and the political science students from Penn State Erie, the Barron College. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Dr. Steele, you are forgiven. Recognize the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Scanlon.
Well, Chairman McGovern.
Thank you. And I, too, want to welcome the students from Penn State. I represent eastern portion, so good to see you. And, there is some balance in the state here. I would yield to the ranking member.
I just want to respond to the gentleman from Pennsylvania. I mean, at the beginning of the pandemic, Donald Trump was president. And I just want to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record an article that appeared in Politico. It says 15 times Trump praised China as coronavirus was spreading across the globe. The president has lambasted the WHO for accepting Beijing's assurances about the outbreak, but he repeated them as well. And I think it's important for the record to be accurate. And with that, I thank the gentlelady for yielding.
And was there anything you wanted to add, Mr. Harms? Are you good?
No, I very much appreciate the bipartisan support. I do think that the underlying idea of getting as much information into the hands of the American public is absolutely the right thing to do right now. Again, I've now heard the word conspiracy theory brought up a whole bunch of times. We're a democracy. Let's let Americans look at the information and form their own judgments. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate the bipartisan support, and I think that this is, it's about transparency, because during, one of the things that COVID did, did to us is the distrust of government, I think. And I think this is a step in the right direction of that transparency. And I won't take any more time, but I fully support the bill, and I'm very glad that we are moving forward with this, and the Senate has moved it. We need to make sure that the public has the information that we have. So thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from New Mexico.
Thank you, Chairman, and I really appreciate having a bipartisan bill where both the chair and ranking are coming before us. I think it's the first one I've participated since I've been on rules, and I do appreciate the fact that there has been such good work by the Biden administration on trying to find out where this started and then agree that in order to combat disinformation and to make sure that everybody knows that we go ahead and allow the American public to see this information. And so with that, I yield back. Thank you.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few quick questions. Mr. Himes, can't the president do this himself? Can't he just declassify this stuff and release it all? So why do we have to do this? Why can't we just make a call over there and Mr. Turner and say, Mr. President, why don't you just release this for the good of the people?
Thank you, Mr. Massey. In all of this, we have to be concerned of getting information out so the public knows, right? We also have to look at the current conflicts that are occurring between the United States and China. And by our doing this, we're helping the president, because the president both has the ability to do this on his own, and he also has the ability to veto our bill. But getting our bill, he has full endorsement, and as I would have said to Mr. McGovern when he was asking me about, why are we marking this up and then sending it to the floor of the Senate bill, this is momentum. This is giving the president an understanding that he has bipartisan and bicameral support to take this action, and anybody who criticizes him, he can cite that support.
Do we think this is, in the Senate, it passed with a veto-proof majority.
Unanimous consent.
So he's not really going to have much of a choice. I'm sympathetic to your argument. That makes sense. It's the first one that's made sense to me on why he's not just doing it himself.
I take that as an accomplishment, being the first time testifying before you in your new position on rules.
I like your very first answer. But maybe it's early to anticipate how this would go here in the House, but it sounds like we may also achieve a veto-proof majority here.
And I wouldn't be so concerned about a veto as much as sending to the president full support, bipartisan, bicameral, for him to take this action. And then I think certainly with that, especially with the caveat that we're giving full acknowledgement that they can redact ideas and information that they think would put our intelligence community at risk.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here. Why did we withhold our support and help for the president for 2 years? Why did it take us this long to do this bill?
Well, a couple of things that you do have to take into consideration, but I think the biggest one that I would cite is it does take the Senate longer to do things. So I think it's good that this came from the Senate, because certainly the House has debated and looked at doing this.
They got it done before your committee, though.
The fact that they have done this gives us really the ability to know that we're not doing a meaningless task.
I support this bill, and I'm glad we're doing a rule for it. It's my understanding that we are leaving out amendments, or we're not going to have amendments on this because well, first of all, it's a short bill. It probably doesn't need any amendments, and this will be decided later. But it seems to me that there's the inclination not to amend this Senate. Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, with this button, the goal is to get this on the president's desk. And obviously, if there were any amendments, it would have to come back to the Senate, and then we don't know what the Senate would do. We have this bill that has come out with unanimous consent, and so moving it is most expeditious.
Thank you.
And if the gentleman would
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
not wishing to interrupt the momentum going forward here, but no amendments have been filed.
Okay. Well, that makes it easy. We don't have to be the bad guys, right? I'm excited that this bill is going to pass and it's going to go to the president's desk, and I'm hopeful for a veto-proof majority, not that I think he would veto it. I haven't seen a statement from the White House opposing it, as we've seen on so much of our legislation already this year. And one of the things I'm excited about is there's a whole list, just to go a little bit afield of the particular direction of this bill, there's a whole list of things that were conspiracy theories. They're going to have to be acknowledged, and this is the first of many in a list. And I think there's probably information at the government, somewhere in the executive branch. There's certainly.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
I want to thank y'all for coming. And this has been long overdue. As Thomas, Congressman Massey mentioned, the sad part about it is why this president has led the way on this. When you look at his responses, on September 20th, September in 2020, the day after the travel restrictions were put in place, Biden criticized Trump for his xenophobic response to the coronavirus. February 2023, no consensus on the lab leak via the press secretary. March 2023, Biden abruptly bails on reporters when asked about the COVID origins. Questions like, very hard questions, will you hold China accountable? He threw up his hands and he walked away. What this is doing to the public is really eroding any type trust in government, and our tax dollars are paying the price for this. So thank y'all for bringing it forward. It's long overdue. Should have been here long before now. And as the president could easily do this, as he can easily lift other informative things on January 6th, which he just will not do. But thank you for bringing it. I'm glad it is bipartisan, and probably one of the few, but this one is, and I think it's a good thing. I yield back.
Sure. Thanks, the gentleman. Mr. Roy of Texas is recognized.
I thank the chairman. I thank you guys for being here. Just a couple of quick questions to the chairman. Am I not correct that there was a good deal of dismissal of the questions that some of our colleagues and were raising in 2020 and 2021, when some of our colleagues were raising questions about the origin, that there was a pretty significant amount of dismissal, both by some of our other colleagues, but importantly in the press. For example, February 2020 New York Times article, Senator Tom Cotton repeats fringe theory of coronavirus origins. Quote, the conspiracy theory lacks evidence and has been dismissed by scientists, but has gained an audience with the help of well-connected critics of the Chinese government, et cetera, et cetera. Is that not, concerning that in a world in which we're supposed to be exploring and seeking the truth, wherever it may lead, on issues as important as this, that we had such an immediate dismissal by the national press as well as some of our own colleagues, just simply wanted to know questions that now we're saying we need to release information declassified, and we have at least two of our major investigative bodies, the FBI most notably, saying, there might be some truth to this deal. Are you as concerned as I am about that in terms of being able to assess information?
So obviously our committee deals with classified information, not necessarily the public discourse that happens in the media. But you are absolutely correct, of course, that during the public discourse as to the origins of COVID, there was extreme polarization that did occur. But I do want to caution and lower the expectations. The report that we're asking to be declassified will not provide you an absolute conclusion as to the origins of COVID. There is no smoking gun in this report.
Right.
It is, I do believe, informative as to the types of statements that Director Wray is now making, that it is likely. And again, I think that's his, when someone says likely, he's stating his opinion. He's not stating a fact or an absolute conclusion. But again, as you were just citing, the importance of the weight of this type of information being in the public discourse, I think does help us all go forward. And I think it illuminates the path for what the administration and the intelligence community needs to do to get us even more definitive information as to the source and the origins of COVID.
Any thoughts to add to that, or? No? Oh, okay. The only thing I would add to that, in terms of I appreciate the point about saying there's no like smoking gun, and I don't doubt that at all. I think my primary concern is that we, at least as a body, this is a good step, but again, in the seek truth wherever it may lead vein, I can't say with certainty, right? But what bothers me is the extent to which there was such rapid and immediate dismissal of the possibility. And remember, it was labeled as being, xenophobic, anti-Chinese, right? That it was somehow connected to and leading to violence here in the United States, and that these things were, it was off, you literally just couldn't go touch the topic of whether or not it originated in China, because somehow that would be, I don't know, racist or something to say that we can't go inquire as to whether or not this thing started in China. And, and if it did start in China, whether it was through the markets or in a lab. And I do think this is important, and again, we'll see what's in it. You guys have seen it, and so we'll look and see. I would like to include in the record a letter that I and 13 of my colleagues sent to Speaker Pelosi on September 14th, 2021, seeking answers to questions surrounding the origins of COVID-19, specifically questions involving EcoHealth Alliance and some of the information that we know that the NIAID knew at the time, and was met with crickets from the then Speaker of the House. And I would just ask consent to insert that in the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, so ordered.
And, in broad terms, I would just say that, I would note that the House Foreign Affairs Committee report in August of 21, that same year, like a month or two before we sent that letter to the Speaker, concluded, quote, "It's an opinion of the committee minority staff based on the preponderance of available information, the documented efforts to obfuscate, hide, and destroy evidence, and the lack of physical evidence to the contrary that SARS-CoV-2 was accidentally released from a Wuhan Institute of Virology laboratory sometime prior to September 12, 2019. I don't know if they're right. That's just colleagues in the minority in the House Foreign Affairs Committee. I have no idea if they're right. But that was in August of 21, and I recall, the reactions of saying that was, politically motivated, as opposed to trying to lay out alternative theories contrary to where the media was taking this whole question. But with that, I would yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Turner, thank you for being here today before the Rules Committee. Is this the first time we've had you up here?
I've personally been here before, but not as chairman. You're correct.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was glad to see this bill come over from the Senate in a unanimous way. We certainly take all classified information seriously, so I was hoping you could expound on what this legislation would do from a technical perspective. As far as declassifying information, I don't want this to be misconstrued. We are concerned with protecting sources and methods. All this legislation says is that the American people have a right to know the origins of COVID-19, given its serious impacts on our lives. Is that a fair statement, Mr. Chairman?
Sure. So, as we all recall, the president indicated in his first year that he tasked the intelligence community to review all of the information that they currently had and to issue a report within 90 days of the status of the investigation on COVID-19 and the conclusions and information that could be derived from the data that the intelligence committee had. And also in that time period, if there were any other things to follow up on, it included the ability, of course, for them to initiate new inquiries. But it was not necessarily expected that it was going to be in itself a full-blown investigation, an investigation really of what they knew, and presented in a manner where it was a usable document instead of it being 18 different intelligence community agencies, but a document that presented the assessments of the community as a whole. That document had both a classified and a declassified version. The declassified version was made very widely public. The classified version then is what we're dealing with today, and it has not, since it was sent to the intelligence committees, widely disseminated, and that is what we're calling for declassification.
And widely disseminating the information is part of a critical effort to prevent a pandemic of its kind from hitting us again in the future.
Right, absolutely. The review of this is not just, trying to put a bullseye on the map as to a location and source. It is to do a review of how anything like this could have happened, and if it is avoidable in the future, and if there are things that need to be done, how do we approach that, and what do we do?
And declassifying this information is important in the overall awareness of the American people on prevention in the future, as well as other countries that would work together with us to prevent it in the future.
We have the chairman and the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee who have seen the work of the intelligence community, and it is both of our opinions that it would be helpful.
Yeah. And then finally, thank you. One additional question. My understanding is that similar legislation did pass the Senate last Congress, but was blocked from consideration by the previous House majority. Can you think of any reason why the American people should not have an understanding of what their government knows about this matter that would protect public safety?
I'm unaware of the procedure that you just discussed, but I can tell you this. After we take action, this will be bipartisan and bicameral, and a very strong statement, which is very important.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you, Chairman Turner.
Chair, thanks, gentlelady. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, for coming here in a spirit of bipartisanship. And, I just want to reiterate that at the height of the pandemic, that anyone who spoke out suggesting that COVID-19 might have come from a lab leak in China, they were denounced as a conspiracy theorist, a spreader of misinformation. They were canceled. They were shadow banned on social media platforms. Accounts were suspended. People's reputations were damaged and destroyed. Now, fast forward to today, we have the Department of Energy and the FBI both publicly reporting that their conclusions are that COVID-19 emerged as a result of a lab leak from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, a research institute in Wuhan, China, controlled by the People's Republic of China, and ultimately the CCP. And coincidentally, it has been uncovered that Dr. Fauci commissioned and had final approval on a scientific paper to disprove the theory that the virus leaked from the Wuhan lab in the very earliest days of this pandemic, and then cited that same paper that he commissioned and had final approval of as if he did not in many media outlets, press conferences, when the American people were scraping for answers. I think it's easy to say that the American people are fed up with the smoke and mirror show that Washington bureaucracy and the administration has performed over these past few years, while denouncing those who dare to offer a different view based on real evidence. This legislation is long overdue. Americans deserve to know as much as possible. And when I say that, I think of the nurses in my district who've lost their jobs due to the subsequent vaccine mandates, or the family members of the senior citizens who died in New York State's disastrous nursing home policies. They deserve to know the truth, and I thank you for bringing this bill forward so that the American people can get the answers that they deserve, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Are there any other questions for our panel? Seeing none, thank you very much for your participation today, and our witnesses are excused.